Week 15 is here, Dolphins fans. How are we doing today? It is Ben Morgan of the Fins Up Network. I'll say that our version of the playoffs is continuing this week on the road against a team with a winning record. So now, not only is this one going to be looked at as a must win if we want to stay alive in that AFC playoff race, but a win on Sunday would also go a very long ways with this team's overall confidence, knocking out some of those narratives that still exist around Tua and the Miami Dolphins. Guys, we're going to be jumping into this week's preview in just a second. But before we do, I want to hear from you. Your thoughts on this game. If you have any questions that you would like answered in this week's final preview and prediction video, go ahead and drop them in the comments. We'll definitely get to as many of those later this week as we possibly can. If you haven't gotten subscribed yet, make sure you are doing that as well. Would definitely appreciate it. Before we jump into all of this week's preview, let's jump into some latest Dolphins news and updates because we got a couple of accolades. Zach Sieler named the AFC Defensive Player of the Week for his performance last week against the New York Jets. Man, what a nice performance, right? 2 sacks, 4 tackles, 3 quarterback hits. One of those quarterback sacks, pushing the Jets back towards the end of regulation, giving us a chance to even push that thing into overtime and get that much needed win. So some nice accolades there for Zach Sieler. Now let's just make it 2 in a row for you, Zach Sieler. Some other roster news as well. The Dolphins opened the practice window for wide receiver Grant DuBose. He's actually been on IR since that disastrous week 2 game performance against the Buffalo Bills. He had that drop that led to an interception. Just everything kind of unraveled from there as well. Let's try to evaporate that from our minds. I sort of question this move. I don't necessarily know or see what Grant DuBose brings to the table at the position. Regardless, his practice window has officially been opened. This is also the second week of practice windows being open for Bradley Chubb, Cameron Good, and Blake Ferguson. So something to monitor, as if those guys are not brought back onto the active roster within 21 days, they will have to remain on IR for the remainder of the season. We're going to go ahead and skip the injury report for today since it's only Wednesday, as obviously we always do with this one. We'll take a deeper dive in this week's final preview and prediction video. But let's jump into this matchup. Let's start with this Texans offense that's, I'm going to say it, it's been average this year, and it's not that it's been bad, but when you go into a season with all this hype, you got CJ Stroud, you got Joe Mixon, Stephon Diggs, Nico Collins, Tank Dell, Dalton Schultz. It's a lot of good guys. The majority of the talking heads out there figured, you know what, this is going to be better, one of the better offensive units in the entire NFL. It just hasn't lived up to the hype at this point in time because you got CJ Stroud, goes out, sets the world on fire last year, wins the offensive rookie of the year. Now fast forward into this year, he's got 2 less touchdown passes on the season than our quarterback, Tua Tagovailoa, despite playing in 4 more games. He's also been sacked the second most of all NFL quarterbacks. The Texans offensive line is allowing 3.2 sacks per game. Now, let's cut him a little bit of slack. We know all about injuries. The Texans wide receivers have as well. You got Stephon Diggs, who gets hurt. He's a Dolphins killer, by the way. We're catching a break here. He gets hurt halfway through the season. He's lost for the year. Nico Collins misses most of October into November. He is back now, but he's only played in 8 games of the 13 so far this season. Tank Dell missed a game earlier this season as well. But when you look at this Houston Texans passing game, the key is Nico. It's Nico Collins. Like I said, he has missed some time this year, so he actually only ranks 18th in the NFL in total receiving yards, but he actually leads the NFL in receiving yards per game. I believe he's at 104 yards per game. So he's been a real issue for defenses when healthy this year. So we always ask ourselves, is he going to get the Jalen Ramsey treatment? And if so, is Jalen Ramsey going to have better luck this week than he did last week against the Jets and Garrett Wilson? That's going to be your matchup to watch in this passing game because, quite honestly, Nico Collins, if you haven't watched much of him in the Texans, he is a big play waiting to happen. He's in like the top 5 or 10 in the NFL this year. At 17 yards per catch, he was at 16.2 yards per catch last year as well. So the book is out on Nico Collins. And nothing should really come to a surprise to Jalen Ramsey, Anthony Weaver, and this Dolphins defense. This guy, like I said, is a big play threat waiting to happen. Now, I have been told recently that Jalen Ramsey, definitely not 100% when it comes to his health right now. But I would say that we'd probably all agree that a 70, 80% Jalen Ramsey is probably better than anything else we could throw at Nico Collins. So let's just hope for a bounce back week from our secondary and Jalen Ramsey specifically. On the ground, Texans relying heavily on Joe Mixon, who's 28 now. It seems like an older running back. Feels like Mixon's been around forever. But then I look on our roster and I see a 32-year-old Raheem Mostert. So maybe Joe Mixon's not near as old as I'm making him out to be. But he has gone over 100 rushing yards in 7 of the 10 games that he has played in this year. He scored a combined 12 touchdowns for the Texans as well. So he's done really well. But besides him, this Texans team, they don't really rely on any of their other running backs for, I'll say, significant work in the backfield. Now, the good thing is that we continue to fare pretty well against running backs. We're now up to 7th in the league, allowing just over 105 rushing yards per game. We're averaging only just allowing 94 per game over the last 3 games. But these two guys, Nico, Joe Mixon, those are the guys we got to key in on defensively against the Texans. If we can limit these two, the numbers tell us that we should be in this one when it's all said and done. And we definitely got to stick to that trend of getting sacks on CJ Stroud as well. Last week, I believe we did get 3 against Aaron Rodgers, but they sort of came in a little bit of a bunch towards the end of the game, which is not bad by all means. Timely sacks are huge in the NFL, but there was really no pass rush consistency throughout that game against the Jets last week, especially that game. All right, let's flip things around. Let's talk about the Texans defensively, us offensively. Will it be the game that we finally have the run game return to the offense? Because personally, I have seen nothing over the last month plus now to suggest that that's going to be the case. But sooner rather than later, we got to figure out a remedy. We got to have some success in this department. At this point in time, when we run the ball, it just kind of feels like a wasted down. The Texans are 10th in the NFL. They're allowing just under 100 rushing yards per game. So not only are they pretty good against the run, but like I said, our output has been borderline, I'll say pathetic. Maybe not even borderline. It's just been pathetic over the last 5 games. Listen to this. 67 yards, 82 yards, 65 yards, 39 yards, and 44 yards. That is our total output, rushing output, each of the last 5 weeks. You can accumulate any of those totals on one single carry. 2.8 yards per carry over that 5-game span as well. Our guard play has been pretty much terrible in the run department. Our tackles are injured. We've missed some runs due to kind of that lack of conviction when hitting the hole. The issues, I'll say they run deep. Unfortunately, it's pretty deep in the run game. I don't think that there's just one correctable thing. So I expect another uphill battle this week with the run game. And I'm probably guessing that we're going to see another heavy dose of Tua and the passing game. And speaking of that passing game, how about Tua? Whew. I don't know if you saw this stat floating around recently. The first player in NFL history to have at least 40 pass attempts, multiple touchdown passes, and no interceptions in 3 consecutive games within a single season. The first one ever. Pretty impressive, right? We already talked about him having more touchdown passes than CJ Stroud, despite playing in less games. Tua is second in the NFL in passing yards per game behind only Joe Burrow, who has just been a statistic machine this year. So the passing game has been absolutely clicking since Tua came back from IR. And now the nice thing is that we've seen a multitude of ways that we've been able to take advantages of different defenses with that said passing game. It's been screen passes. We all know what Jonnu did in overtime. We've seen those angle screens to Devon Achane, which we should probably take a back seat on those for a couple of weeks. I feel like the Jets were starting to catch up on those, despite having a lot of success throughout the season. The deep overs to Tyreek are hitting. We're finally incorporating more of those mesh routes. That's getting Jalen Waddle going a little bit with some catch and run opportunities. defenses, when you do this, you simply can't take away everything. So unfortunately, with no game, we sort of need all of that stuff to be clicking through the air in order to be really that efficient on offense. Now, despite the Texans being 7th in the NFL in passing yards allowed per game, they have had a bit of a rough go of it lately as well, allowing the 5th most passing yards per game over their last 3 games. Let's look at those last 3 games. You got Mac Jones, goes for 285 and 2 touchdowns. You got Will Levis that went for 278 and 2 touchdowns. And you got Cooper Rush that went for 354 and a passing touchdown. So they have been giving it up through the air. And it's not like they're giving it up through the air to like the Joe Burrows of the world either. 2 of those are backup quarterbacks, and the other one is a second-year guy who, quite honestly, the jury is still out on him. So, yeah, I'm with you. I know we want balance. Our offense will be at its best when and if we find that balance. But I personally think we're currently set up offensively to go as far as Tua and this passing game will take us. So hopefully that historic streak that we talked about, hopefully that continues on Sunday. But the other thing that we need to be super mindful of going into Sunday's game, that dynamic duo of edge rushers that the Texans have. Man, they are solid. Danielle Hunter, Will Anderson Jr., they have combined for 20 sacks so far this season. And that's with Will Anderson. He's actually missed 2 games this year as well. So speaking the obvious here, not ideal timing for Terron Armstead to be injured. Plus, we're already on right tackle too, with Austin Jackson being on IR. So there might be, like I said, we'll take a deeper dive into the injury report later this week. But there might be a lot riding on the shoulders of Kendall Lamm, one of our older players, and Patrick Paul, one of our younger players. Now, the good thing, there is a good thing here, I'll tell you. Mike McDaniel has shown some decent ability in game planning pretty well when we're playing against elite edge rushers in the past. I think back a couple of years when we played against the Browns and Myles Garrett, and we completely shut him out. Go back to that year as well. We opened the year against the Chargers, I believe. Khalil Mack, Bosa, well, those guys anywhere to be found. We've shown the ability to be able to really game plan. Mike McDaniel has with the offensive line, with using some of the guard play, getting some tight end help, getting some help from Alec Ingold, getting the ball out of Tua's hands fast. He's shown ways of being able to do this. But each week in the NFL can be substantially different. So we've still got to look for these one old tackle, one young tackle potentially to perform at a very high level against this quality group of edge rushers. Dolphins fans, I'm going to flop this up on the screen real quick. We are going to wrap it there for today. But as I mentioned earlier, go ahead, drop your questions that you may have for that final preview and prediction video. Go ahead, drop them in the comments. We'll definitely add some of them to this week's final preview video between the Dolphins and the Texans. We will wrap it for there today, Miami Dolphins fans. But until next time, fins up.